Well, thank you, Craig, and it's my pleasure to be here. I really sincerely believe that you folks, and I'm just hoping that you're seeing my screen and my slides right now. So we're showing it. Okay,
Looks good.
Okay, super. Okay, the reason I'm so excited about this is that I sincerely believe that this community holds the key to solving Canada's productivity crisis. And I'm hoping that in this talk, I can give you some new insights on how your role and the work that you do could and should play a much larger role in producing some real growth for the Canadian economy. So yes, we are at a break the glass moment, as Bank of Canada's Carolyn Rogers observed in her speech nearly 2 years ago. And we're seeing the results every day of stagnating productivity, and that affects all Canadians. And by the way, I think there may be some people from the US. I know that affects you as well. What this means is that all the work we've done to improve the economy has had negligible results, and things are going to get a lot of worse if we don't turn things around. So my thesis today is that in order to solve productivity, we need to look at it very differently than is currently in fashion. The good news is that we've got people, we've got methods for turning that around, and the people are right here in this room, as it were. Now, a quick note, you might find some of the statistics I'm going to quote a bit hard to believe, but I can assure you that these all come from the Statistics Canada website and on the US side from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So let's start with basics for just a second. As we all know, productivity is the measure of how much we produce with a given set of inputs. If we increase our output without adding any resources to our inputs, productivity goes up. Similarly, if we reduce inputs relative to outputs, the number also rises. The word efficiency has a bad name lately, but efficiency is really what productivity is about. Economists have noted that growing productivity, essentially doing more with less, is the only way we can improve the general standard of living. And as Carolyn Rogers noted in her speech, productivity should be everybody's goal because we all gain from it. I want to add a sort of rejoinder to this, if you will, that's often left out. You know, we're in the habit of looking at aggregate numbers when we talk about productivity, GDP, or whatever. But if our economy is to become truly more productive, we need to see improvement in the quality, availability, and affordability of the major components that make up the consumer price index. That is, the stuff that the average Canadian and the average American buys. As people sense intuitively, this hasn't been improving for a long time. And as I will show, the situation is even worse than what the Bank of Canada is telling us. I should add that affordability and the economy are top-rated issues for Canadians, according to polls. So if we take this on in earnest, we're really going to be attacking the things that Canadians care the most about. Let's look at Canada's response and what Canada is doing to the crisis. These are some familiar items, I guess, because we read about them in the news, and they're summarized here from the government's December budget. So we've got spend on technology and adopt AI, funding for AI research, upgrade digital infrastructure, attract private investment. These are all good things, but as I will show, these are not the entire answer to making the goods and services that Canadians need better, more affordable, and more available, not even close. And shrinking the workforce, by the way, should never be seen as a magic ingredient for increasing productivity, as we will see. How we define and measure productivity will, of course, have a fundamental impact on how successful we're going to be at improving it. So let's take a quick look at how people are keeping score on this one. The prevailing metric used for reporting on Canada's productivity is called labor productivity. That's shown in this simple equation. On the surface, labor productivity makes a lot of sense. If Canada can grow its GDP without adding labor costs, labor productivity goes up, indicating that we're operating more efficiently. Similarly, if we find ways to reduce the number of workers without compromising output, say by adding automated equipment, we're also making productivity go up. Now, proxies like this are a necessary tool for understanding complex matters, but sometimes they're inaccurate and even misleading. In this case, there are three fatal thinking errors that get covered up when we rely on productivity or on labor productivity metric as our guiding metric. So I want to go through some of these misconceptions. Number one is this whole thing of tying productivity to the GDP. Many economists argue that the GDP is a poor proxy for the output of the economy, especially since the United Nations turned over the measurement of the GDP in 1993 to a body called the System of National Accounts. It's the SNA, which is essentially run by representatives from the financial sector. The fact is that the GDP, or the SNA, despite objections from economists, has altered the rules for calculating the GDP, notably in 1993 and 2008. Studies have shown that every one of these rule changes has caused the GDP to rise artificially with respect to non-Western economies. In other words, GDP became politicized, and that applies to Canada, to the US, and to the EU. This conversation is well worth following, but for today, there's just one aspect of it that I would like to highlight. While the GDP has been artificially boosted in various ways, for our purposes here, I want to talk about the inclusion as output of something called capital deepening. That is, the money that companies invest in equipment and facilities, including AI. Of course, capital investments are a necessary ingredient in our economy, and when companies invest in these, that's a good thing. But these are inputs, they're not outputs. What matters and what will make the difference to Canadians is the improved efficiency or higher productivity with respect to, and I'm going to harp on this over and over again, the goods and services that Canadians depend on. So those inputs have to pay their way and then some to cause a true productivity improvement. The bad news is that capital deepening, as it's called, comprises the lion's share of GDP growth since the millennium. Without this artificial boost, our GDP would be reported as basically zero. This means that the goods and services that make up the CPI index are no better, no more available, and no more affordable than they were 25 years ago. Total factor productivity, or multi-factor productivity, is another readily available metric for tracking productivity, and many economists have argued that this, not labor productivity defined as GDP per worker, should be our guiding metric. And yes, it's available from Statistics Canada and the US from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Total factor productivity, or TFP, is far from perfect, but it does represent a far more realistic picture of our progress. TFP is not measured directly. It is like a lot of macroeconomic functions calculated with a combination of industry data and algorithms. TFP is what we call a residual. To get there from labor productivity, we subtract capital deepening and workforce growth. Remember, those are inputs from the output on the top line of the equation. At the bottom line of the equation, we add materials, facilities, transport, etc., which gives us a rough idea for all the inputs. Again, this is far from perfect, and there are reasons to criticize it, but it is a much better indicator of how well we're doing at improving the quality, availability, and affordability of the products and services that Canadians and Americans depend on. TFP gives us a very powerful lens for looking at the past 26 years. This is my nerdy slide here. The solid blue line represents the TFP, total factor productivity, of something that Statistics Canada calls a special aggregation. This is essentially a group of sectors food, manufacturing, mining, residential, construction, that roughly represent the goods that the average Canadian is most dependent on. The orange line represents a similar index, but for services. The dotted line represents the real GDP, that is, the GDP with allowances made for inflation, that is, factoring out increases in the CPI. As you'll see, Canada's TFP for goods that Canadians depend on most took a nosedive during the early 2000s and never recovered. Basic services have stayed relatively flat. So the bottom line is that the improvements we're seeing in the GDP, modest as they are, do not reflect a significant improvement in our standard of living. This mirrors what Canadians have been feeling, according to polls. I'd like to now move on to another major misconception. And this is basically the obsession organizations have with cutting headcount to grow productivity. And I know this is a very familiar complaint that we have in the lean community. This approach has long been promoted by the tech sector. And I know this from experience because years ago, I worked as a software sales rep. And back then, they gave us a tool called the ROI calculator. The idea was that you'd ask the customer various questions about their operation, and then this spreadsheet-like program would calculate the hypothetical payback from deploying the said technology. There were various categories: saving time, convenience, reduction of errors, improving quality. But the only thing that ever really held sway was cost savings from reducing what we called FTEs, that's full-time employees. This was considered a hard saving, while everything else was a soft saving. So the pitch was, invest $1 in our technology, eliminate $2 in salaries, and you'll be a hero. Accordingly, the AI hyperscalers, that's Google, Amazon, Meta, Oracle, are pushing headcount reduction as a way to recoup their massive investment in data centers. AI godfather Geoffrey Hinton, a good Canadian, noted recently that the only way hyperscalers will get their trillions back is by having customers who fire a lot of people to buy their products. Accordingly, the tech sector is aggressively promoting a concept the MIT Industrial Productivity Center calls zero-sum automation. This is tech deployments that are expressly designed to reduce cost by replacing people. Tech firms like Amazon, as we've all read in the news, have announced major layoffs, which they claim they will backfill at lower cost with AI. Zero-sum automation, however, has not fared well. Since the 1980s, the tech industry has been dogged by a concept called Solow's productivity paradox, so named from a quip by economist Robert Solow that you can see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity statistics. The problem is stubbornly persistent. IPC found in a 2022 study that despite significant tech investments in industrial automation in the 2010s, productivity actually declined. The reason cited is that any gains made in productivity through automation were lost by loss in flexibility. In other words, companies had to hire more people to adapt these automation systems to keep pace with evolving market conditions. We're seeing similar patterns with AI deployments in white-collar workplaces. According to a multi-year study by MIT titled Gen AI Divide, 95% of AI pilots fail to demonstrate a measurable impact on the business. The study concluded that most fail due to brittle workflows, lack of contextual learning, and misalignment with day-to-day operations. Companies aligned with the tech sector have been predictably more aggressive than their AI deployments, but even they are facing headwinds. Swedish fintech Klarna, once regarded as a poster child for AI deployment, had to walk back its plans to replace 700 customer service employees with AI mid declining quality and disappointing efficiency gains. In what's dubbed as the Klarna effect, several other tech firms, including Salesforce, have recently walked back their claims about the efficacy of replacing people with AI. It's useful to mention here that many lean initiatives are launched with that same intention of cutting costs and getting rid of people. Those fail for similar reasons. The fallacy of zero-sum automation applies whether the technology is AI, robotics, or lean. And a side lesson here is that yes, lean is a technology in many respects, but we're making a big mistake if we see lean as only a technology. One of the keys to using technology to increase productivity, and I would add that to use lean to increase productivity, is a growth mindset. To illustrate, let's say some kids start a leaf clearing business in their neighborhood. They'll learn pretty quickly, hopefully not the hard way, that you'll need to acquire some rakes. That makes it much faster to clear leaves. And then maybe somewhere along the line, they'll acquire some leaf blowers to their arsenal so that one kid can do more lawns in an afternoon. Now, let's say a nerdy older brother or sister comes along and says, buy my leaf clearing robot and you can get rid of half of your staff. That might look good on paper, but now all of a sudden we might have quality problems we never had before. The robot is likely to miss areas. Maybe it doesn't recognize the color of the leaves. Maybe machinery damages the flower beds or breaks down when it runs into a sprinkler system. And last but not least, customers might be missing those nice kids that used to come over. So with a growth mindset, you use your people to grow the business. Maybe you could offer a 10-point growth check, health check for lawns and make recommendations and offer to implement them. Maybe there are opportunities to help watering the plants. Maybe the kids get into snow clearing in the winter. So instead of cost cutting, your strategy is growth. And a kid who started raking leaves at age 10 maybe gets into landscaping as a teenager. I should add here that a major way that companies grow is by acquiring other companies. So I want to be clear that what we're talking about here is organic growth. That is, growing the business by getting more customers or getting more business from existing customers. That's the kind of growth that boosts the economy in positive ways. These same studies that pointed out all the failures with technology also indicate what is working. On the industrial side, for example, the fastest growing segment in robotics is collaborative robots or cobots. Companies that implement these are full of success stories in which workers became part of a technological solution. Operators, and I've talked to some of them, are now learning to train and program robots. And so now the robots do for them all the extra work that they don't like to do, dangerous welds or making hundreds and hundreds of the same bracket day after day, that kind of thing. So it's really a win-win. On the AI side, the study points to a phenomenon called the shadow AI economy. Millions of people use ChatGPT, and we use it to save time, whether it's automating emails, filling out forms, creating a travel plan, planning a meeting, or whatever. That's definitely making people more productive, but it's doing so by involving the people who own the process, not eliminating them. The study says forward-thinking organizations are beginning to bridge this gap, that being the AI divide, by learning from shadow usage and analyzing which personal tools deliver value before procuring enterprise alternatives. It all boils down to a concept that IPC calls positive sum automation. That is, deploying technology that helps people increase their productivity. Along that line, EU is now promoting a concept called Industry 5.0, something interesting to look up. This is a paradigm in which technology is first and foremost seen as a way of improving work processes that centers on the workers. Toyota actually created a three-step model for positive sum automation. In my book, Productivity Reimagined, the example I used was Parker Hannifin, a global manufacturer of instrumentation components for aircraft that's very advanced in their lean journey. When a process owner, Hannif at Parker, requests a robot or some other form of automation, they have to go through 3 steps. First, they have to establish clear goals for the automation, e.g., will this make the process safer, reduce defects, or allow us to do it with fewer people. Then they need to consider whether the process could be simplified to achieve these goals without automation. Often the process ends there. If that's not possible, mechanical tools such as lifts with pulleys are considered before they go to a software-driven solution. Again, remember that when we go to software, all of a sudden you got to do software upgrades, there's obsolescence risks and all that. So this is all taken into account. It goes without saying that the success rate of automation projects at companies that follow this step-by-step approach are much, much higher than the average company. I'd like to move on to one more thinking error, and that is this notion that explicit knowledge is all we need to run a company. Explicit knowledge is a lot of things. It's what people learn in school. It's this presentation. It's what they teach in business courses. It's intellectual property, design, strategic plans. It's also, by the way, all the stuff that AI uses on the web to learn. So on the other side, we have tacit or process knowledge that basically resides in the heads of workers. Unlike explicit knowledge, it is constantly evolving. It is not codified in any way, so it can only be acquired through experience or by working with a mentor. And it's the invisible relationships that help workers navigate the various interdependencies that are so vital to productivity. A lot of people would like to think that tacit or process knowledge is just a rounding error, and you don't lose much when you lose a worker. Maybe the cost of training, but there's a lot more than that. Knowledge studies have shown that in organizations, the knowledge used to make decisions of that knowledge, tacit knowledge comprises about 90%. So that's why it's so important for leaders to spend time in the workplace. It's also important to realize that tacit knowledge is not accessible to AI. Remember, the large language models that are the predominant class of AI can only be trained on explicit codified knowledge that humans feed to it. So in terms of knowledge that's needed to be productive, AI is only working with the tip of the iceberg. Yes, AI will keep getting better, and there's some promising trends, but we're still a long way from matching human capabilities. The primacy of its explicit knowledge is central to traditional hierarchical management. And this is a point, by the way, that I made a lot in my book. I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that. The myth is that you can run a company almost entirely on explicit knowledge. That is what your management reports are telling you. This graphic here, by the way, was beautifully created by ChatGPT 5.0. And my trivia question is, can anybody spot the spelling error? The big idea is that CEO of a company uses industry benchmarks, courtesy of some management consulting firm, to optimize each of the assets in the company, with the assumption that once each is optimized, the company will prosper. Note that productivity is siloed as HR's problem. This explicit knowledge is judged to be universal. That's why so many managers believe that there's no need to go to the front lines, whether you're running a factory or a services organization. It's also why private equity people believe they can optimize a company by using financial benchmarks. As an addendum to that, I'd like to note something that's probably obvious to most of you, and that's that continuous improvement converts tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge through the creation of work standards. This is how we create learning organizations that innovate, and this is why culture is so important. An important rejoinder to all this is the notion that explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge can be managed as separate entities. This is central to the outsourcing strategies that many companies have followed. The idea is that we can promote high-value work here in Canada or the US and sub out the low-value work to countries where the cost of labor is lower. The results of this thinking have been disastrous on several fronts. We put millions of people out of work. We've become dangerously dependent on global supply chains, as we found out when COVID broke out. But even more important, perhaps, we've lost, according to researchers, something called the industrial commons. That is the community that makes it possible for industries to innovate. The key to this is the tacit knowledge that's shared throughout personal relationships. We see this when people convene on the shop floor to discuss a problem. We see it when R&D and engineering work iteratively with production, ensuring that designs are practical and scalable. And of course, we see it in the services industries and in government with all the interrelationships that people have and all the inside knowledge that they have. We see it when companies work closely with their component suppliers and their customers, either formally or informally. Losing all this has meant that complex products like microchips, solar panels, photovoltaic cells, and batteries that were invented in North America can no longer be manufactured here. And as we're painfully aware with the chip shortage, bringing them back will be a monumental task. By contrast, one country that has the process knowledge story right is China. As we know, Apple and Tesla followed the segmentation of knowledge model, i.e. the idea that they could leverage the power of their intellectual property by applying it in China, where the cost of labor is lower. Accordingly, Apple trained 28 million high-tech workers in China. As of early 2025, Tesla had trained, quote, a whole generation of Chinese managers, engineers, and technicians, end quote. All this has given birth to a surge in grassroots innovation fueled by tacit knowledge in China. Process knowledge is touted by Chinese leadership as one of the pillars of that country's maker strategy, where they emphasize growth of what they call the real economy. That is, making the items Chinese people depend on of better quality, more available, and more affordable. China now owns 60% market share of the EV sector, and we're going to start seeing some of their cars in Canada. And they are rapidly gaining ground in this and many other high-tech sectors. That is, after dominating what Westerners call the low-value portions of the economy, which, by the way, China has no plans of abandoning. So what does all this mean for Canada? The maker movement in China is not something we can copy, but its lessons should be noted as we move forward. I think the biggest lesson from all this is respect for people. This isn't only about treating workers fairly, it's about respecting the value that people can bring to an organization rather than seeing hourly pay and salaries as a cost to be minimized. As Intel CEO Andy Grove said in a 2011 speech, we've got to get over this preoccupation with, quote, the mythical moment of creation, end quote, by lone geniuses, and appreciate the effect community can have on innovation. Next, we need to focus on reducing waste in the real economy. That is, the value streams that matter to Canadians. Remember that process improvement applies to every industry, not just a cherry-picked selection of high-value industries. Then and only then should we talk about technology. Already very good at developing technology, but not deploying it. The evidence has shown that the key to deploying technology, and some leading Canadian technology experts have expressed this, is understanding the processes you are transforming. Accordingly, a more holistic approach to productivity will solve our tech deployment deficit, which is key to Canada's tech deficit. Next, we've got to focus on growth rather than cutting our way to prosperity. The value of employees increases as they gain experience. Okay, anyway, so I think, again, growth, not cost cutting, is absolutely essential. As we showed, you've got to grow, you've got to create careers for the people that improve things. Last but not least, we've got to get real about metrics. We have to be able to pursue real growth, and we can't be just looking at something like the GDP, which kind of is inflated by all sorts of things that have nothing to do with productivity. So get real about metrics. Let's talk about the government of Canada. What needs to happen here? If Canada wants to take on productivity in a serious way, I think a simple start would be to really aggressively promote operational excellence. I know the state of Washington is doing some of that. I think we should do that, and then some. I should just point out, a sort of an operational excellence deficit here in Canada. There's lots of work to be done here. If all businesses and governments were more process aware, that would have much better success with deploying technology, and there's ample evidence for that. Accordingly, this would be key to solving Canada's tech deficit, which, as I mentioned, is essentially about lack of adoption, not about our inability to develop technology. Within that context, the litmus test for government incentives should be showing how a said initiative will pay its way in real economy productivity. That is, increasing the quality, availability, and affordability of the goods and services that Canadians depend on. Encouraging business dynamism, that is, companies that grow, is one of the priorities expressed by Carolyn Bennett in her Break the Glass speech. As Bennett noted, we can do this by ensuring that there's a level playing field for medium-sized companies to operate. The next thing is healthcare, and I think it's really important to focus on this because this is perhaps what Canadians are most passionate about. We've got fabulous case studies, but the government never seems to be behind this in a big way. Let's make healthcare our national center of excellence and use it as a basis to improve other industries. Finally, let's get real about the environment and start creating some real incentives for doing more with less. Instead of quibbling about the types of energy we use or the percentages we divert from landfill, let's encourage people to do waste audits that encompass all waste, not just some targeted metrics. Companies can make huge productivity gains by pursuing sustainability in a holistic way. Sustainability should be a byproduct of reducing waste through operational excellence. I want to close off with a sort of a pipe dream, if you will, sort of a fantasy just based on some published statistics that are out there. Just to imagine, this is an imagine slide. Imagine if we declared an all-out war on waste in Canada, and supposing that we were able to reduce waste by 25% in some critical industries. Imagine what this would do. For example, the World Health Organization has reported that there's 42% waste in healthcare. If we reduce that by 25%, we'd have 14 more capacity in our hospitals. That's over 100 new the equivalent of 100 new hospitals. Just imagine what that would do to our wait lists and the stress in our healthcare system. If we chopped a quarter off the reported waste in construction, we could increase production of housing units by 13% at no extra cost. Now imagine what this would do to our housing crisis. If we took on a quarter of the waste in manufacturing, imagine what we could do if we grew our manufacturing capacity by 12%, again, at no extra cost. And imagine that the war of waste, we increased food production by 15%. Imagine what that could do for food insecurity in Canada. As I've said, this is a pipe dream and these are stretch goals, but I believe that extraordinary results are achievable if we decide that reducing waste is a top priority for our economic well-being. So to sum up, we're living with the consequences of decades of low productivity growth. We're not creating the products and services that people depend on any more efficiently than we were 25 years ago. This has to change if we want our standard of living to improve. Technology can help, but if we look at it narrowly as a means to fire people in order to make the numbers look better, we're on a dead-end street, as the evidence is already showing. Finally, most companies and governments are operating in the dark in terms of the processes that create value. We need broad awareness of process throughout the public and private sectors that will enable people to use technology wisely to grow productivity and to realize the enormous opportunities to increase productivity through reducing waste throughout the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob. Really appreciate that macro level view. We sometimes get so caught up in our individual processes and our individual organizations that we don't see the big picture. And that's part of why we wanted you here. So I feel you've really delivered on that. So thank you for that. I'll turn it over to our participants. If you have any questions, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and ask it of Jacob, or type it in the chat. We'll try to address them in order. While we're waiting for questions to come in, Jacob, I have one that I think might be taking the pulse a little bit of the room. Sure. It would be that in the public sector, often cutting positions is kind of associated or mistaken for productivity. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on how people who are in this event could go back to their workplaces and kind of help make the case that cutting is not actually productivity, mm-hmm. To kind of make the case for OpEx? Any thoughts you would share given your broad experience?
Yeah, certainly. I think that first of all, the notion of cutting, and I guess maybe some people got this letter from the Prime Minister about the possibility of cuts in the future. I think that we have to see people, we have to talk more about the value that people create. Some people look at government departments as sort of necessary evil, and we have to do this and we have to do that. But I think there has to be much more awareness about the people that depend on government services and what value of government services is. I'm not, maybe there's not a sort of a slam dunk answer to this. But I think we need to people have to understand how their processes provide value. I mean, I think that's really where it begins. Whether you're applying for permits or whether you're consulting, you're paying your taxes and you want to have that go more quickly, or maybe you have questions about taxes that are very, very hard to get answers for. I mean, wherever you are in government, I think it's important to think about the people that are benefiting from those services and perhaps the jeopardy that might be in with cuts that are not informed about what's going on. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's a long road that we have to travel here.
Yeah, and it's a complex topic and doesn't always, despite the request from Trish, it doesn't always lend itself to an easy elevator pitch. But I think that's something that's worthy for people to work on, and if you and to share if they come up with a great elevator pitch for it. Okay, I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions yet. Ken, can you please post the poll for people to give feedback on Jacob's talk? I have another question, as in case I don't see anyone else having put questions yet. Automation is top of mind, and automation is top of mind for many people, for many leaders. Do you have a sense, or could you provide some kind of a pitch to our participants to convince their leaders that process improvement should precede digitization of the work or process improvement? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, of course, it's hard to argue with aggregates. If someone says, oh, well, automation's going to do this and that, but unless you get down to specifics, right? But someone has to look at the specifics of a process that you're doing. And if somebody says, well, we can streamline the way we're going to reduce and automate the way we handle emails so that there aren't as many emails out there. So maybe what you need to do is say, well, why are there so many emails in the first place? You need to look at the bottom of the process. So in anything you're looking to automate, you need to say, why is this being done and what purpose is this being done? And could it be done with less, whether that's emails or applications or forms being filled out or whatever.
Got it. Yeah. So why are you doing it in the first place? We find it's often really useful to identify what business problem are you trying to solve,
Mhm.
and once you've identified the problem, then you can get into, well, what are the root causes, and are those causes addressable by digital or AI, or do you need people and process
Mhm.
to solve those types of things? So
Yeah.
there's a triage you can do there. Let's see. Vincent, you said you don't have a question, but you have a comment you'd like to make. Do you want to just speak up with your
Yeah, if
comment?
that's all right. I just wanted to thank you, Jacob, because I had never, like, in listening to you talk, I'd never thought of the economy quite in the way that you like explained it, right? Where it's like there's all these things that we're producing,
Mhm.
and the goal is to produce those things in the way that people want so that they consume them.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought like of something cool with your AI analogy, right? That it's like it's cool to use AI, but if in using AI we lose some of the aspects
Mhm.
of the thing that we are making that people enjoy, then it's kind of a mistake to overly rely on AI. So I just wanted to give you that feedback. Like that was kind of like a
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
mind blown moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the end of the value stream, right? I mean, somewhere there's a customer, and somewhere we got to make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. And if part of the thing is that they enjoy, like, I think we've all felt this, you call like a service place and you want to talk to a person, but then you just talk to a robot and you're like, I just want to talk to a person. So yeah, anyways, it just made me think of that.
Right.
So
Oh, great.
thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we've got literally a minute left. There's a question from Marie-Ève Graton, who's one of our speakers actually today. When we're talking about productivity for cuts, it seems like there's a hidden cost like burnout, engagement, or loss of knowledge. How should leaders think about the long-term productivity impact of those human factors?
Well, gosh, you've really got again to look at the whole process, how things are being done. I mean, yeah, there's lots of stress and burnout and stuff like that, but you really again, there have to be conversations with the front lines, with the people that are doing the work, doing the stress, or experiencing the stress. There's no quick answer to that, but people have to be heard, and there has to be a yeah. I mean, there's all the work you do, folks, having people heard, having those Kaizen sessions or whatever you do is absolutely has to be. I guess I would say that any automation has to be within the context of that. It has to be in the context of smart processes and how we make those processes better, and respect for people and respect for the work that they do.
Okay, cool. You've really tied it up all together there. So Jacob, we're at time. I want to thank you so much for joining us again. I think it's the third time now, and we really appreciate it. And your macro views really do help us put our work in the important context in which they exist.
Well, I'd
So
like to keep
thank you
at
so
it,
much.
guys. Your work is very, very important.